Gold has always been more than a metal. For thousands of years, it has been the ultimate store of value, the foundation of empires, and the silent witness to humanity's greatest crimes. And in the chaos following the Second World War, more gold changed hands in secret than perhaps at any other time in history. Gold that belonged to governments, central banks, occupied nations, and private citizens vanished into vaults that no one could officially acknowledge. The war ended with clear military victors, but in the shadows of diplomacy and finance, the winners were often the ones who could move wealth without leaving a trace. This is the story of how the world's most trusted form of money was smuggled, stolen, laundered, and hidden away, and why some of it might still be missing today. To understand how so much gold could disappear, you have to remember what it represented in the early 20th century. Before the war, much of the world's currency was backed by gold reserves. Central banks hoarded it as the ultimate guarantee for their paper money. For nations, gold meant credibility. For individuals, it meant security in a world that was about to be torn apart. As tensions in Europe grew in the late 1930s, governments that feared invasion began moving their reserves abroad. The Netherlands quietly sent over 120 tons of gold to Britain, Canada, and the United States. Belgium transferred hundreds of tons to safe locations, or what they thought were safe locations. When the Nazis advanced in 1940, they moved quickly to seize the reserves of every occupied country. Gold was not just loot, it was a tool of war finance. Nazi Germany used captured gold to buy critical war supplies from neutral countries, especially from Switzerland, whose banks were more than willing to accept it without asking too many questions. The most infamous case was Belgium's gold. Before the occupation, Belgium had sent 198 tons of its reserves to the Bank of France for safekeeping. When France itself fell, that gold was shipped, supposedly for protection, to the port of Dakar in West Africa, then under Vichy control. From there, it quietly made its way back into the hands of the Reichsbank, effectively financing the Nazi war effort. Other nations tried to be more cautious. Poland, anticipating invasion, executed a daring evacuation of its gold reserves, moving them across Romania, Turkey, and eventually to the United States and Canada. Even so, large amounts of gold in occupied territories ended up in Nazi hands, much of it melted down, recast, and stripped of identifying marks to hide its origin. But Nazi theft was only one part of the story. As the war dragged on, the Japanese Empire was doing its own plundering in Asia. In occupied China, Southeast Asia, and the Philippines, the Japanese military seized gold, silver, precious stones, and cultural treasures, often referred to in post-war accounts as part of the so-called Golden Lily operation. The treasure was allegedly hidden in secret vaults and tunnels, especially in the Philippines, to be retrieved after the war. While some of these stories have entered the realm of legend, there is credible evidence that significant quantities of precious metals were indeed concealed and never officially recovered. Like in Europe, these operations blurred the line between military conquest and outright organized crime. By 1945, as Allied forces advanced, both German and Japanese authorities tried to move or hide what they could. The Allies captured some of it. The U.S. military's Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program uncovered not only stolen artwork, but also enormous caches of gold in salt mines and hidden depots. One of the most famous discoveries was in the Merker salt mine in Germany, where American forces found more than 100 tons of gold bars, coins, and currency notes alongside priceless artworks. Yet the gold recovered there was only a fraction of what had been taken. Much of the rest was already gone, traded, laundered through neutral banks, or buried in locations still unknown. Here is where the story shifts from wartime theft to post-war geopolitics. The immediate aftermath of the war was chaotic. Europe lay in ruins, borders were shifting, and the Cold War was beginning to take shape. This was fertile ground for unaccounted wealth to be absorbed into new power structures. The Allies set up the Tripartite Gold Commission in 1946 to redistribute recovered gold to the countries it had been stolen from. Over its decades of operation, the commission processed around 336 tons of recovered gold, but compared to the thousands of tons believed to have been seized during the war, this was a small share. The rest had vanished into private vaults, state reserves never acknowledged, or financial networks that spanned continents. One of the more controversial aspects of this era was the role of neutral nations, especially Switzerland. The Swiss National Bank and private banks purchased hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gold from Nazi Germany during the war. While some of it may have come from legitimate pre-war reserves, much was clearly looted from occupied countries or even from individuals who perished in the Holocaust. In the late 1990s, historical investigations confirmed that Swiss banks had knowingly dealt in stolen gold and, in many cases, had maintained secrecy long after the war ended. Similar allegations were made against banks in Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey, which had acted as intermediaries for wartime gold flows. The post-war years also saw the rise of covert intelligence operations funded partly by untraceable assets. In a world divided between East and West, having access to gold that could not be linked to any official ledger was invaluable. Allegations persist that some of the missing wartime gold was used to fund anti-communist operations, support favored political parties, or stabilize friendly regimes in Europe and Asia. In this sense, the gold did not simply vanish. It was repurposed into the machinery of a new kind of global conflict, one fought with espionage, propaganda, and economic leverage rather than open battle. By the 1950s and 1960s, much of the world had moved to more complex financial systems, but gold remained central to international settlements under the Bretton Woods system. Officially, gold prices were fixed and reserves were declared. Unofficially, some countries likely held more than they admitted, and some gold in official vaults may have had a darker history. Nations like the United States and the United Kingdom, which had taken in large quantities of gold during the war years, incorporated it into their reserves without public discussion of its origins. For countries rebuilding their economies, the question of whether the gold in their vaults had once belonged to someone else was often ignored in the interest of stability. And yet, the mystery endures. Even today, researchers, treasure hunters, and governments occasionally announce new findings. A buried cache in a forest, a train loaded with valuables supposedly hidden in a mountain tunnel, a shipwreck carrying gold bars intended for wartime payments. Many of these claims turn out to be exaggerated or false, but some are real. The historical record is clear. Large amounts of gold went missing between 1939 and 1945, and much of it has never been officially recovered. In financial terms, we are talking about billions of dollars in today's value. In symbolic terms, it is a reminder that in times of crisis, the rules of ownership and morality are often suspended. The modern connection to this story is less about the specific bars of gold that vanished, and more about the mechanisms of disappearance. The Second World War proved how quickly wealth can be moved, hidden, and transformed when powerful actors decide the normal rules no longer apply. The same techniques, moving assets across borders, laundering through intermediaries, concealing ownership through shell entities, are still in use today, not only by governments, but also by corporations and individuals. In moments of financial crisis, assets do not simply evaporate. They often reappear in the hands of those with the means to hide them. For investors, the lesson is stark. Gold may feel like the safest asset, immune to inflation, political upheaval, or currency collapse, but its safety ultimately depends on where it is stored and who controls it. In wartime Europe, having gold in your country's central bank was no protection if an invading army could seize it overnight. In peacetime, holding physical gold in a jurisdiction that later changes its laws or freezes foreign accounts can be just as risky. The disappearance of gold after the Second World War is not just a historical curiosity. It is a case study in how wealth can be stripped away under the cover of chaos. The financial historian's takeaway is simple. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. When global systems are under stress, whether from war, economic collapse, or geopolitical rivalry, the line between legal transfer and outright theft becomes very thin. The missing gold of the post-war years is a testament to how fragile financial security can be when the world turns upside down. In today's world of digital money, cryptocurrencies, and shifting geopolitical alliances, the question is not whether wealth can still disappear. It's how fast it can happen, and whether you will notice before it's too late. Understanding these patterns is not just financial education, it is self-defense. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.